I spent 2 years restoring my in-laws' hunting lodge for free. On the day it was finished, they gave the deed to my wife's uncle and said, he'll appreciate it more. My wife just shrugged. You hate the cold, she said. I left with frost in my beard, and the contract they forgot I made them sign. The first time Elena mentioned the hunting lodge, I thought she was joking. Imagine it, Jake, she said, flipping through an old photo album on the couch. My grandpa built it with his own hands in the 60s. It's rustic, yeah, but it could be beautiful again, like a retreat, just us. No neighbors, no noise. I remember staring at the photo she held up, a faded image of a dark, sagging A-frame nestled in what looked like an overgrown clearing. There was snow on the roof, some of it caving in, and tree limbs clawed at the windows. All I could think was how cold it looked. I'm not a retreat in the mountains kind of guy, I muttered. And you know how I feel about hunting. She gave me that look, soft, a little pleading. The one I always had a hard time saying no to. My parents said if we fix it up, they'll sign it over. Make it ours. For good. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Elena, come on. That place looks like it belongs to a horror movie. It's probably falling apart. It is falling apart. That's the point. We'd fix it. Together. She nudged closer. Please? I want to keep something of my family's. Something that feels like a future. We'd been together 10 years. Married for 8. And she was right about one thing. We didn't have much that was ours. The house we lived in was her parents' old place. The garage I ran was built on a patch of land my uncle had gifted. Everything we had borrowed. So I agreed. On one condition. I want it in writing, I said. No more maybes. If we're gonna pour our lives into this shack, I want their signatures first. Elena blinked. You don't trust me? It's not you, I said. It's just, people change their minds. Families get funny about inheritance stuff. You know that. She didn't answer for a while. But that weekend, her parents came over. Her dad, Harold, grumbled the whole time. Something about lawyering up over a damn shack. Her mom barely looked at me. But they signed. On paper. In front of 2 of my buddies from the garage, who served as witnesses. When we finished, Elena pressed the document into my hands like it was a love letter. Happy? She asked, half smiling. Cautiously, I said, tucking it into a manila envelope. That was early October. The leaves had just started falling, blanketing everything in reds and golds. We drove up to the lodge a week later for the first time in years. The gravel road leading up was nearly swallowed by weeds. The roof had collapsed on the backside. One of the support beams was completely rotted through, and the air inside smelled like old wood, mice, and ghosts. This is gonna take a miracle, I said, stepping carefully through the sagging floorboards. No, she said, wrapping her arm around mine. Just a man with a good heart and a toolbox. I should have known then. I wasn't just rebuilding a lodge. I was building a trap. That winter hit hard. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and won't leave, even after 3 cups of gas station coffee and a space heater blowing on your face. I spent the first couple weekends just clearing a path to the front porch, hacking through thorny brush and half-frozen vines with a machete I borrowed from Carl at the garage. Elena came up once, brought sandwiches and 2 travel mugs of cocoa. We sat on a rotting step while she talked about design ideas. How she wanted the walls stained dark like the lodge in that magazine. How the upstairs could be a reading loft. I nodded, even smiled a little, but I was already looking at the list in my notebook. Haul out debris, jack up the frame, replace 4 joists. The real work started in March. Every Friday after I closed the shop, I packed up my tools, filled the truck bed with lumber or insulation, and drove the 2.5 hours up to the Adirondacks. Sometimes I'd make the trip twice a week, sleep up there in a folding cot I set up by the old fireplace, wrapped in 2 sleeping bags and still shivering through the night. I didn't mind the silence. Actually, I think I started to crave it. There's something honest about swinging a hammer at midnight, your breath fogging up your safety goggles, no one around to watch or help, just you and the echo of your own effort. I kept records, receipts, photos, every shipment logged, every expense dated. I printed them out and filed them in a binder I kept in the glove box. Not because I didn't trust Elena, but because I didn't trust history. Paper was proof. She stopped coming up after June. Too much going on back home, she said. And besides, I'd just get in the way. She'd still text sometimes, little encouragements, like you're amazing, babe, or almost there. And I'd send back photos, fresh drywall, refinished banisters, the old stone chimney I rebuilt from the ground up. But I noticed she stopped asking for updates. It became routine. Weekends at the lodge, weekdays at the garage. Every Sunday night I came home sunburned in the summer, frostbitten in the fall, dog-tired year-round. And every time Elena would look at me like I was a soldier returning from war, proud, distant, slightly guilty. Neighbors in the area started noticing. A retired couple from the lake 2 miles down stopped by one afternoon in August, brought me a jug of cider and said, "It's incredible what you're doing with the old Baker place. We thought it was a lost cause." Yeah, I said, leaning on my shovel. So did I. That second winter, I finally finished insulating and sealing up the whole main structure. I had rebuilt the staircase by hand, restored the windows, even rewired the electrical with a buddy who owed me a favor. I laid new flooring upstairs, 1 plank at a time, each one groaning under my knees like it was warning me. I worked until my hands cracked open. I got frostbite on 2 toes that never fully healed. I ate more instant noodles in those 2 years than most broke college kids do. But when I nailed in the last bit of trim along the rebuilt porch and stood back to look at it, truly look, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not the puffed up kind, just quiet satisfaction. Like maybe this was going to be worth it after all. That night I stood alone inside the finished lodge, now warm with electric heat and pine walls that smelled brand new, and whispered to the empty air, "We did it." I didn't know who "we" was anymore, but it felt better than saying "I." Elena suggested a small gathering to celebrate. "Just close family," she said, "so everyone can see what you've done. You should be proud, Jake." I was. And I figured maybe this was it. The turning point. The payoff. Not just the lodge itself, but the moment she'd finally stand beside me, hand in hand, and say, "Look what we built." She planned everything. The food, the guest list, even the playlist. I didn't ask questions. I just hung the last strand of lights on the wraparound porch and swept the floor twice. The day of the party, I arrived early to light the wood stove and knock the ice off the steps. My fingers were still raw from the last round of sanding. Blood had dried in the cracks of my knuckles, but I felt good. I even shaved for the first time in a couple months. The first car to show up was a beat-up Subaru I didn't recognize. Out stepped a tall guy in a puffy vest, mirrored sunglasses, and slick-back gray hair. He walked in like he owned the place. "Uncle Clay," Elena shouted as she rushed to hug him. I hadn't seen Clay in years. The last time, he was trying to sell me a pair of custom snowshoes out of the back of his truck. Former ski instructor, now mostly a professional couch surfer from what I remembered. "Place looks sharp," he said, glancing around with a half-smile. "Way better than I expected." "Thanks," I said, extending a hand. He slapped it instead, like we were frat brothers. "Heard you've been up here every weekend, man. Damn, that's some grit." I wouldn't last a day without a hot tub and a six-pack. I forced a chuckle and poured myself a glass of cider. The rest of the family trickled in. Her parents, a couple of cousins, an aunt with 2 yappy dogs that stayed in the car. We did the usual tour. People oohed and awed at the new floors, the reclaimed wood beams, the loft with its custom railing I'd built over a dozen nights. And then, as we gathered in front of the big stone fireplace, Harold, Elena's father, cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming, everyone," he said. "Big day for the family." I stood beside Elena, one arm loosely around her back, feeling her tense slightly. Harold raised his glass. "We're proud to announce that this place, this beautiful piece of family history, will be handed down to someone who truly appreciates the spirit of the Adirondacks. Our nephew, Clay." I blinked. Someone clapped, then another. Elena smiled, but not at me. At Clay. My stomach dropped. "What?" I said, barely above a whisper. Clay raised his glass with a smug grin. "You've done wonders with the place, man. Couldn't have done it better myself." I turned to Elena. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You told me." I swallowed. "You said it'd be ours." She finally looked up. "Jake, you've always hated the cold." It hit like a slap. I stood frozen in the middle of that room I built, surrounded by people clinking glasses and sipping wine, while the blood dried under my nails from fixing a busted pipe that morning. I didn't yell, didn't throw a chair. I just turned, stepped out onto the snow-dusted porch, and walked down the hill in silence. The laughter behind me faded with every step, so did any illusion I had left. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the back of my truck, parked in the empty lot behind my garage, watching the frost crawl up the windshield. I kept going over it in my head. The signatures, the witnesses, the promise. Every damn nail I drove into those beams. By morning, I had made up my mind. The signed agreement was still tucked away in the fireproof box under my workbench, exactly where I left it the day Harold and Marlene came by to sign. I hadn't looked at it in over a year, but when I opened it, my hands were steady. Their names, right there in blue ink. Dated, witnessed, legal. I made a call. Martin Decker wasn't flashy. He didn't have a TV commercial or a fancy office with glass walls. He worked out of a converted brownstone in Burlington, and the only thing sharper than his suits was his mind. He read the agreement twice, flipping the pages slowly, his eyes barely moving. When he finished, he sat back and folded his hands. "You've got a nail in their coffin," he said calmly. I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or angry. "You're sure? It's clean. They offered it. You accept it. There's consideration. Witnesses. They signed over future ownership contingent on your labor, and you've got 2 years of documentation to prove you delivered." I slid the binder across the table. Martin opened it. Receipts. Supply orders. Photos of the lodge when it was barely standing. Photos of it after. Notes in the margins. Dates and times. Sweat in every page. "You want to sue for breach of contract?" he asked. "I want what I was promised," I said. "And I want them to know I'm not some idiot handyman they can toss aside." Martin nodded once. "We'll file for breach and unjust enrichment. I'll draft the paperwork tonight." Back at the garage, I snapped a photo of the original agreement, just in case. Then I made copies. One for me, one for Martin, one that I left in the safe at the bank, because I didn't trust that Elena wouldn't try to sneak in and make it disappear. The next morning, Elena sent a text. "Elena, let's not ruin the family over this. Please, just let it go." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't answer. She had made her choice in front of 30 people, with a glass of champagne in her hand. Now she wanted to fix it in private, like I was just overreacting. The complaint was filed the next day. The lodge, the contract, the repairs, all laid out in black and white. Martin said it'd take weeks, maybe months, but we had what we needed. The law was slow, but it had a memory, just like me. They thought I'd go quietly, walk away, like a good boy who knew his place. They were wrong. This time, I was swinging the hammer. She showed up at my new job on a Wednesday. I'd taken a part-time gig at a garage just outside bar, while my own shop was under renovation. Some storm damage from last winter we never got around to fixing. The place was quiet, tucked between a diner and a bait store. I liked it that way. Elena pulled up in the same white SUV I'd put new brakes on 2 years back. She stepped out wearing a coat that probably cost more than my truck, looking around like she didn't belong, because she didn't. I wiped my hands on a rag and met her halfway across the lot. "You really came all the way out here?" I asked. "I needed to talk to you face to face. I don't think there's anything left to say." She crossed her arms. "It's just a cabin, Jake." I laughed, quiet, bitter. "No, it was never just a cabin. It was 2 years of my life. 2 years of believing in something you said, something you signed. You stood there, Elena. You signed with your parents. You're blowing this way out of." "No," I cut in. "You promised. You signed. You lied." She blinked like she hadn't expected that much heat from me. Like I was still the same quiet guy who stayed up sanding trim until midnight just to hear her say good job. I turned and walked back toward the shop. Later that week, Martin got a response from her family's lawyer. They claimed the contract was informal, a gesture of goodwill, that Jacob was never owed anything. A week after that, they offered me 10 grand to walk away. Martin slid the check across the table. I stared at it for maybe 2 seconds, then pushed it back without touching it. "They think this is a payoff? They're trying to bait you into settling. They know the contract's strong. They can keep their 10,000. I want what I bled for." Word started getting around. First, it was Elena's sister, posting vague things on Facebook like some people can't let go of bitterness, even when offered kindness. Then my truck got keyed in a grocery store parking lot. Deep gouge across the driver's door. No note. People around town started asking questions. At the diner. At the gas station. One guy I knew from the lumber yard whispered, "Didn't you build up that place by Moose Rock? Heard the family gave it to her cousin or something." I just nodded. Let them talk. That's what she wanted, I figured, to make me look like the bitter ex. The guy who couldn't take a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was theft, dressed up in champagne. I didn't yell online. I didn't hit back in public. I just kept showing up at Martin's office with more receipts, more records, more truth. Because I knew what was coming, and I knew they weren't ready for it. It came in an email marked confidential, discovery materials. Martin called me the second it hit his inbox. "You're going to want to read this yourself," he said. "I'll forward it now." I opened the file in the back of my trailer, sitting on the edge of my cot with a space heater whirring in the corner. The sun had barely come up. Steam curled out of the coffee mug in my hand, but I didn't take a sip. The file was a forwarded email thread between Elena, her parents, and, of course, Clay. The first message was from Marlene, dated nearly 10 months before the celebration at the lodge. Subject, transfer plan. She wrote, "I think we all agree that once Jacob finishes the structural repairs, Clay should be ready to step in. There's no reason to involve him in the long-term plans. He's a good worker, but doesn't see the bigger picture." I felt my jaw lock. The next reply was from Elena. "Exactly. Once it's finished, we can celebrate and make the switch. Jacob won't notice. He's too busy hammering things." I stared at that line for a long time. He's too busy hammering things. Like I was some animal. A trained ox too dumb to realize he was walking in circles while someone else drew the map. The next message was from Harold. "Let's not drag it out. Clay needs to start building equity if he's going to take over. We'll handle it like a family decision. Jacob can't sue us. Not without looking like an idiot." I took a slow breath. I felt it then, the burn behind my eyes. Not tears, just rage pushing up from someplace deep. I forwarded the email to Martin. 5 minutes later, he called me again. "We're going for punitive damages," he said. "This isn't just breach of contract anymore. It's bad faith, malicious deception, fraud. Will the judge even allow it?" I already filed a motion. The language in these emails is clear. They never intended to follow through. It was a setup. A week later, the judge ruled in our favor. The case would proceed to a bench trial. Full consideration, evidence, testimony, everything on record. Elena's lawyer tried to file a motion to seal the email thread, claimed it would be damaging to her personal life and reputation. The judge denied it. I got the news while changing out an alternator at the shop. I wiped the grease off my hands, stared at the text from Martin, and let myself smile for the first time in weeks. That night, I went back to the trailer, cracked a beer, and read the emails again. They thought I'd be too busy hammering to notice. But they forgot something. I wasn't just building a lodge. I was building a case. And now the nails were in their hands. The mediation was held at a law office in Montpelier. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee, carpet that looked like it hadn't been vacuumed since the Clinton administration. I walked in wearing the same jacket I used on the job site. Canvas, faded, dust on the cuffs. Elena was already seated at the far end of the table with her parents. They looked smaller than I remembered, like the walls had closed in. She wouldn't look at me, not once. Her mom had a tissue crumpled in one hand. Her dad sat stiff, lips tight, like someone had duct taped his pride to the inside of his mouth. Martin laid the binder on the table and slid the email printouts across to the opposing counsel. This is your last chance to settle. The family's lawyer, some silver-haired guy in a navy suit with a name that probably ended in Esquire since birth, cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to offer a settlement of $50,000. Martin didn't blink. I did. I leaned forward. Half the property's value or the whole thing. No discounts. The lawyer stiffened. That's, take it or see us in court, Martin said, voice like steel. There was a silence. Long, heavy. Marlene sniffled. Harold rubbed his temples. Elena picked at the skin on her thumb like she was trying to disappear under the table. They didn't take the offer. We stood up and left. Outside in the parking lot, Martin lit a cigarette. He didn't even smoke and smiled. They're cracking. He was right. Later that week, I got a call from a mutual friend. Clay had been arrested up in Lake Placid. Drunk again, crashed his snowmobile into a county fence, and tried to fight the EMTs who showed up to help. I wasn't surprised, but it did make things easier. 2 days later, Martin called with another update. Check your bank account, he said. Now, I pulled up the app on my phone. Jesus Christ, I muttered. What is it, he asked. She moved the money. Elena moved over $14,000 out of our joint account. Silence on the line. Then, when? Looks like last week, before the mediation. Martin was quiet for a moment. Do not confront her. I'll freeze the assets first thing in the morning. We'll file for an injunction and flag it in the divorce proceedings. That's when it really hit me. It wasn't just the lodge. It wasn't just the betrayal. She had planned to leave me the whole time. Leave me broke. Leave me behind. But she got greedy. And Martin got faster. By the end of the month, the financials were frozen. The court filings were locked in. And I had every scrap of evidence backed up in triplicate. They were unraveling not just in court, but in public. People were starting to talk. The neighbors who used to nod politely at Harold were now crossing the street. Elena's nonprofit job posted a staff update on their website. Her name was gone. I didn't celebrate, but I did rest. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. And in the morning, I packed a fresh file folder for Martin, labeled divorce, evidence, and I stapled a note to the front. Not just the lodge anymore. Now it's everything. The call came on a Tuesday. I was under a pickup truck, tightening a differential bolt, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost let it go, but something about the number 802 area code, unknown contact, made me crawl out and answer. Jacob speaking. The voice on the other end was gravelly, but calm. Name's Dean Morrison. I run Morrison Contracting. You probably don't remember me. I wiped my hands on a rag. I remember. You supplied the beams for the lodge rebuild 2 winters ago. Yep, he said. I'm calling because your name came up in something odd. I figured you'd want to know. I stood up straighter. What kind of something? There was a pause. Then Dean said, Harold used the property as collateral. Private loan. 100 grand. I didn't respond right away. I was staring at the pickup, but I wasn't seeing it anymore. You sure? I'm staring at the lien paperwork right now. Dated 6 months into your rebuild. He borrowed it from a guy I used to work with in Essex. Interest rate's insane. He never told you. No, I said. He didn't. Well, he's defaulted. And my guy's planning to force his sale. I was quiet. Dean added, just figured if you've got any stake in that place, you might want to act before the hammer drops. I hung up and drove straight to Martin's office. He didn't say a word when I handed him the printed lien notice I pulled from the town clerk's website. Jesus, he muttered. They mortgaged it out from under you while you were fixing it. I nodded once. By the end of the week, Martin filed a petition for a court-ordered sale of the lodge. The argument was simple. The property's ownership was under litigation. The original signatory violated terms by encumbering it without consent, and the asset was now financially unstable. The judge granted it. No delay, no extensions. I sat in the courtroom as Marlene cried into a tissue and Harold tried to tell the judge he was emotionally tied to the land. The judge didn't flinch. This isn't about emotion, she said. It's about obligation. You mortgaged a property you claimed had already been signed over. That's fraud. And this court won't let you use sympathy to delay foreclosure. Elena wasn't there. She'd already filed for a formal separation and was unavailable due to a personal wellness retreat. Of course she was. The lodge went up for auction 2 weeks later. It sold fast. People in that part of the Adirondacks knew value when they saw it. And thanks to my years of sweat and lumber, the place was pristine. 6 figures. Clean. Martin cut me a check after closing. I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't the money that got me, though I won't lie. It helped. It was the finality of it. The thing they thought they could dangle in front of me, take away, bury me with, it was gone, but not in their hands. In mine. Harold and Marlene were left with the loan, the penalties, and no asset to cover it. Dean said the creditor was already moving on their house in Saranac. I didn't feel bad. Elena? I heard she tried to contest the sale, but the judge rejected her motion. No standing, no claim, no rights. She wasn't even listed on the deed. She'd been so sure I'd stay quiet, that I'd just keep hammering. But I learned something up on that mountain. Sometimes the best tool isn't a saw or a drill. It's a paper trail, and mine had just paid off in full. I bought a small farmhouse on the edge of Montpelier, just a little 2-bedroom place off Route 2, with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No strings, no deals. No family promises wrapped in barbed wire. First thing I did was plant trees. 6 of them, pines, tall and scrappy, like they had something to prove. Then I built a shed out back with leftover boards from the lodge project. Took me 2 weekends. Didn't rush it. I needed to feel it in my hands again without it meaning anything. There was a beagle at the shelter that barked nonstop when I walked in, then fell asleep with his head on my boot while I filled out the paperwork. I named him Scout. Scout followed me everywhere. Rode shotgun. Waited outside the hardware store. Curled up under the workbench at the garage. He didn't ask questions or offer condolences. He just existed beside me, quiet and solid. I never heard from Elena directly after the sale, but I did get a package in the mail one morning. No return address. Postmarked out of Albany. Inside was a manila envelope with a single photo. The lodge, taken recently. But it was different now. Boarded windows, grass growing wild again, paint peeling at the edges. No one had touched it since the new owners took possession. On the back, scribbled in blue pen, "Bet you regret it now." I smiled. Scout barked once and laid his head in my lap. I folded the photo and tucked it in the back of my shop drawer. I didn't regret it, not a second, because in that lodge, I built more than walls. I built my own line in the sand. I bled for something I believed was mine, and when they tried to erase me, I didn't just stand up. I made sure they'd never forget what they did. Elena lost her job a few weeks after court wrapped up. Martin sent a polite email to her nonprofit's board with a copy of the leaked emails. They called it a misalignment of values in the public statement. Her sister tried to reach out once. Some message about healing and moving forward. I deleted it without opening it. My phone was quiet now. No request for help. No guilt trips. No whispers behind my back. Just mornings with strong coffee, birds in the yard, Scout barking at nothing in particular. I went back to work full-time at the garage. Fixed carburetors, rotated tires, listened to country radio on low volume. It felt good to earn slow. People in town knew the story. Some nodded. Some asked for details. I didn't offer any. Let them wonder how a mechanic from rural Vermont took on a whole family and came out standing. I didn't rebuild that lodge for nothing. I rebuilt it to remember who I was. And I walked away not just with money, but with every part of myself they thought they could take. That was the real victory.